Hello, these are my hands, this is my voice, and here, of course, is my trusty Synthstrom Deluge. Deluge, 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 who knows? We're probably friends no matter how you say it. I wanted to talk about presets and sound design on the Deluge because at the time of recording this video, there is an ongoing preset competition. So we'll get into a bit of that. Quick disclaimer off the top, as always, I do this for fun. I'm not affiliated with Synthstrom Audible or the Deluge. This is a unit that I bought a billion years ago and just fell in love with, and I really like the community, so I try to do videos as a way of showcasing cool stuff that's going on. I'm not a dev. I don't have any say in how any of this stuff goes or anything about this competition, really. I'm just going to enter like all of you, and I hang out on the Discord a lot, which you could do as well. Furthermore, I'm also not the best at sound design, so we're going to fumble through some patch preset stuff together in prep for this competition. Okay, so what is the Deluge preset competition? There'll be a link in the description for the submission form, which is active at the time of shooting this video. And if you're watching in the future, maybe it's already been decided and you're already playing with the presets that won and were awarded prizes and whatever. Hopefully you stick around anyway, because I'm going to go through some potential ideas or tips and tricks from the new firmware or things I've just learned along the way from the wizards in the Discord. So like I said, there will be a link in the description that details the rules and has the official submission form for the preset competition. But let's look at some of the criteria right now. First off, it goes without saying, you have to be on Community Firmware 1.2 Chopin to participate. That's the most recent, at the time of recording, the most recent available community release. So this competition really is about getting people on the community firmware because it's awesome. So join, dive in, and make some cool stuff. The idea is to create up to 10 presets in various categories and submit them. So the categories are bass, DX7, lead, kit, pad, FX, ARP, MPE, and multi-sample. You don't have to do one of each. I'm not going to do MPE, for instance, because I don't have an MPE device. If you wanted to do just a pile of bass patches, that would be encouraged. In fact, I would really love it. So yeah, do what you want, up to 10. You don't have to do 10. But then you can record a 20-second video of each preset so that when voting happens, people can kind of understand if you've got some movement or nuance in your preset that you want people to hear. Do a 20-second recording and they'll get that across, hopefully. So like I said, you have until the end of the month, February 28th specifically, is when submissions are due. After which, there'll be a different form where we can listen to the submission samples and vote for our favorites. Now, of course, I did mention prizes, so let's talk quickly about what those are. It looks like the top-rated presets get a choice of some options, which should be pretty cool because some of them are great. One of them being retrofit your old screen to the new OLED display, should you want to. I mean, I've got a 7-year-old Deluge with the 7-segment display and I'm still going strong, but this could be an opportunity to get yours upgraded if you want. Speaking of, there's you could get a refresh or servicing. Also, a pair of wooden sides could be up for grabs, signed by Ian and Rowan from Synthstrom Audible themselves. And then other things like there was a vinyl release that Synthstrom did a while back, t-shirts, tote bags. Again, all this stuff will be detailed in the link in the description, and maybe I'll pop it up on the screen for you to read for yourself and follow along. So the moral of the story is you have to be on 1.2 Chopin to get involved, and then just make some presets. Have some fun. That's what I'm going to do. I've got a pile that I'm kind of working on, and I'll probably pull it all together in the last minute, like always, and then we'll see what happens in March and beyond. So now that we've talked about the why of creating new presets and how the urgency of the competition and why you should get involved, I wanted to go through some sound design ideas or tricks I've learned, either using specifically the 1.2 firmware or the community firmware in general, and or things I've just learned from like I said, the folks in the Deluge Discord who are just amazing at sound design. So I have some examples of some patches I may be working on, and we can look at some ideas I had if you were thinking about how would you do this or that. So I wanted to start with this wimpy bass patch that I just whipped up that I thought could use some help. So this is a bit of like a patient that we're going to triage together. And one thing that I've learned that kind of surprised me is that you can get some more oomph in the low end by using the high pass filter. I've already got the low pass filter here set down into kind of a range that rolls off the highs. And we got a little bit of envelope on it to give it some movement, you know, but it's lacking. So if I go to the high pass filter, it's off right now. Now you'll probably need headphones or good speakers or a subwoofer for this, but so let's say I start rolling off the bass with the high pass. You're not really going to hear much, because unless we get really aggressive with it, we're not going to roll off too much of the important stuff. But I find around 14 on the Deluge on the high pass out of 50 is a good spot. And now we can up the resonance. This is where the trick really comes in. So we've rolled off at the low, but then we're going to pump up that crest and really bump up that remaining low end. So hopefully you can hear that in your headphones or whatever. Even at 20 is where I kind of like to stay safe, but we can push it. It's going to get a bit rumbly, which we don't want, but this is kind of exaggerated so you can hear that, yes, you can pump your low end with a high pass filter, which is kind of fun. So there's lots of opportunity there. We'll leave it around 20 and 14. So that's one trick right away. Just use your high pass filter on kick drums or bass patches, and you can get a bit of low end going. So speaking of bass, I've got a couple more ideas that are good in a bass context, but bass is not great in the context of headphones. So depending on how you're listening to this, you may want to follow along with your own Deluge and try them out firsthand. Certainly that high pass filter tip is a tough one to hear, let alone when you're in kind of earbuds or whatever. So give it a try in your own context. That takes me to this patch, which is a more realized bass patch I'd been working on. Kind of brassy, a bit more spread out in terms of the oscillator relationship, which is exactly why I wanted to use it to demonstrate this next sound design tip, because it's going to use ways to tighten that up if you want to. And again, these aren't anything new. We're going to get to some cool new features that are only available in the community firmware very soon, but these are just kind of standard Deluge features. In fact, Oscillator Sync is the first one we're going to talk about. That's been around so long on my Deluge, it's moved shortcut positions. Under this magnetic overlay, it's one row down. So there you go. My Deluge is old. But anyway, so Oscillator Sync, basically when it's off, they're not synced, but when it's on, Oscillator 2 kind of snaps to Oscillator 1. When Oscillator 1 re-triggers, it forces Oscillator 2 to re-trigger at the same time, so they kind of stay tight and glued, and it can be a good way to thicken something up or keep a tightness, but it can be hard to hear depending on the patch. Certainly if you have some detune and a bunch of voices going on, if you have unison spread, for example, you can't hear this at all, so I've turned that off in this preset. So let's give it a shot. Here's that patch again. Oscillator Sync is off. It's kind of spread out and a bit kind of flubby. There it's on, and you can hear it kind of tightens up, right? I'll turn it off again. On again. So hopefully you can hear that. If you can't, try it out for yourself, because it does kind of snap the oscillators together in a way that's interesting. Now, I don't want that for this patch at the moment, so I'm going to turn that off, and then we'll get to the next idea. So that next thing that I mentioned is Retrig Phase, and that's something I didn't really know much about until researching some ideas for this type of video, because I find it's easier for me to learn stuff when I'm demonstrating, which is something I've talked about before. So I thought I should really read up on what Retrig Phase and Oscillator Sync are, rather than just fiddling with them, as I've always just kind of taken into account what other people's presets were set to and what I like the sound of. But now I kind of know a bit more about why I like the sound or not, depending on the preset. So in this case, Retrig Phase is set to off, which means both of the oscillators in this patch, when they reset, they're not dictated by a certain degree, so they're more free running, my understanding is. So the phase relationship is free running. The oscillator can reset anywhere in the phase of its waveform. Whereas if I want them to snap to a certain position in the waveform, a certain phase degree, I can set that, and sometimes what that does is makes things a bit snappier. Certainly, it will make things more consistent if you choose a particular spot. Like right now, they're free running, so when I choose a note, It's very possible. There are some other things going on in this preset, so it might be hard to hear, but not every time I select a note will it sound the same, because the phase relationship is constantly changing between the two oscillators. So if I like that, I can leave it. But in some cases of bass or certain plucky sounds, you may want to set your retrig phase to a specific number, even 0, because that just snaps it to 0 degrees in the phase of the waveform every time the note retriggers, and that might make it sound more consistent and have a more plucky attack depending on the preset. So let's exemplify that now. So we've got our flubby bass. Now, if I turn retrig phase just at 0 for oscillator 1, and do the same for oscillator 2, you may hear, it may be hard to hear, but there's a bit more of an attack at the beginning of these notes. I'll turn it off and I'll stop talking. So depending, now we're off again, so we're kind of free running, so it can be different depending on the note. But you'll notice each one of these notes has a similar attack sound now. And we can scrub through the phase degrees, the retrig phase degree of a particular oscillator. So I believe around in the 200s, we start to get a bit more of that flubby relationship between the two, which is interesting. But if I leave this one on 100, for example, and put this one on 100, they're both consistent again in the same phase degree, versus if I go back to 0, they're a free running relationship now. So they could be out of phase at the start, depending on what's happening when they retrigger, or they could be right on phase, but it won't be consistent. So that's to say, retrig phase can be great to dial in even at 0 for each oscillator if you want consistent attack or consistent sound between a relationship between the phase of your two oscillators. If you want consistency and some punch depending on your preset, set retrig phase to a discrete number. The same number is good for consistency or not, depending on what you like. But leaving it off means that they're both free running and they could be out of phase sometimes. So if you like that, that can be some natural movement. But if you want consistency, you can change that. Okay, so moving on to something that has been introduced since the community firmware, I wanted to talk about a filter trick that you can do now. So I've got this kind of pad or sound effect type sound here. And the relationship here, we've got the low pass filter in the 30s, the high pass filter is rolling off some low, but maybe it sounds a little too smooth, or maybe you want something different from the relationship. You want kind of an interesting punch. One thing you can do is that currently the filters run in series. So if you go into the preset menu, press select, scroll to filter, and then you can scroll through. There's low pass, high pass. You can set your frequencies, whatever. But you can also do routing changes. So right now we are routing low pass, then through high pass. So our low pass rolls off our high end, then our high pass rolls off our low end a little bit in series. But listen to what happens when I change them to parallel. So now the relationship will change completely. So there you get a bit more of almost harshness, or it's just a different timbre because they're not working in series anymore. So now you have your low pass filter is rolling off the high end with your resonance kind of increasing the shelf there, and then your high pass filter is rolling off the low end and increasing there, but they're not working on each other's frequencies. They sum after, so you get an instant kind of difference in timbre, which is kind of interesting. Especially, I believe this patch is wavetable, so there's already a bit of a kind of a harsh digitalness to it. So you can accentuate that, for instance, by messing around with that parallel filter relationship. Just another tool in the arsenal, so to speak. It's really cool if you want to combine it with, say, bandpass or notch filters that were also added in community firmware. You can get some interesting effects just by changing the order or relationship parallel series in the filter menu. So give that a try. Sorry, the battery in my Deluge was getting low. I'm rambling too much, so I had to pause for a second. But speaking of things that are new as of the community firmware, I already did a brief look at the new LFO shapes back in one of the community features videos that I did a while back. But suffice it to say, we have random walk and sample and hold LFO shapes now, which can be very useful for adding an interesting sense of movement to existing patches. So I've got this kind of pad patch I'm not really happy with right now. Let's see if we can juice it up a bit. So bear with me. You know, it's interesting. It's fine. It's nothing special. There's probably a million patches like it. But we've got the frequency of our low pass filter, the cutoff, going to both our LFOs here actually at different speeds. But LFO 2 is currently set, I believe, to a triangle or a sine. Let's change that, or a triangle, let's change that to sample and hold. And then let's speed it up a bit. I find sample and hold does well at slightly faster speeds, so you can notice it. So there you hear some stepping already, which is kind of interesting. We can also add a bit, punch it up a bit so you can really hear it. So right there, you've got some interesting movement and life in this patch. And I should say, there's no delay or ARP on this patch. So any of those little kind of percussive notes or staccato notes are being generated, or that atmosphere is being generated by the sample and hold LFO shape. So that's already pretty fun, right? So, you know, we could amp it up if we wanted to really get this going. Or keep it at 8th notes, which I kind of like this right now. So that's pretty cool. Already we've breathed new life into what I thought was kind of a bland, stagnant patch. So let's say we wanted to give this patch a little more nuance or atmosphere. There are a couple of ways we could do that. One is by delaying the onset of that sample and hold LFO shape that we've added. If this were, say, a Dreadbox Nymphes or a Juno 106, there'd be a control that was an LFO delay or LFO fade, depending on the unit. And that would let us kind of delay or fade in the onset of the LFO. We don't have that on the Deluge, but we do have a very powerful modulation matrix. So we can get there through some creative patching. And again, I learned this on the Discord following folks like OK Reza and Post Solar Punk, who ran so I could but walk. So join and follow along yourself. But let's give it a shot. I'll show you what I mean. We're going to set up a long attack on an envelope and then patch the envelope to the LFO oscillator frequency relationship we've got set up here. So let's try it out. So I've got envelope 2 set up with a high attack. We've got frequency, or low frequency oscillator cutoff being modulated by LFO 2 as we set up. Now let's modulate that patch cable by envelope 2. So I'm going to dial it in all the way up because we want it long. So now there's a slight fade before that kicks in, but it's not long enough. So to really accentuate this, we need to do another trick, which is something that blew my mind when I first learned about it. Basically, you can modulate an envelope attack by the envelope itself in the patch points. So you get to really extend the attack time. Again, this blew my mind when I read about it, and I really had to try it myself, and I encourage you to do the same. But basically, if we have our attack for envelope 2 all the way up already, but if we modulate it by envelope 2 in the modulation matrix at a negative value, so we increase the attack even further, you'll hear what I mean. I'm just going to crank it, and that way we can get a sense of how much we're working with here. Notice no sample and hold. It's going to take a very long time based on the math of whatever's happening in the code here. So let me put in some notes in the grid here. Now you'll see me adjust that relationship. So let's bring this down, or up, so to speak, because it's in the negatives already. Not far enough yet. Oh, there we go. So if we go around 28, it starts to kick in right at the end. So you can hopefully see the implication of this. Basically, we've got that oscillator, low frequency oscillator being modulated is taking a very long time to kick in now, which is very cool. And we can adjust this by either the attack time itself or the relationship of the attack time being modulated by envelope 2. So if we lower this again, it kicks in a little earlier. So that's already fun, right? Now let's apply that same principle to the attack of this patch in general, because we want this to take a little longer to all swing in. So right now, let's amp up the attack here. That's all right, but let's do the same thing. We're going to modulate envelope 1 attack by envelope 1 itself. Really extend the attack. So this will be really good for like an atmospheric pad you want under something. Like that was pretty slow to fade in, almost actually slower than the sample and hold is. So let's lower that again now. So now notice everything's a lot slower. Everything's moving so slowly. This would be so lovely under like an ambient composition of some kind, right? So there you go. You can add, not only do we have the sample and hold oscillators to give some more movement and life, you can modulate the LFO by the envelope to extend the attack. You can also modulate the attack by the envelope to make the attack even longer, so you can get some real atmospheric stuff going in your presets that hopefully you're creating for the competition or just yourself. Okay, let's do a couple more simple ones, and then I'll move on because this is rambling and getting way out of hand as usual. But I've got a different one here now. This is kind of just a little plinky kind of ARP thing. But let's say you want a different timbre quickly, or you want to get a spot to start from more quickly. You can... Really, there's a cheat code that's as of 1.2 in the Deluge firmware. You can just start with a DX7 preset in one of the oscillators. So if I go shift oscillator type for oscillator 1 and scroll through to DX7, I can change that from a simple triangle wave to one of the sysx files on my card and select something else that I think would work. So in this case, I think I have a bunch of DX7 related sysx files, and I think there was one in here I liked that was just like a glockenspiel. So let's see where that is, and we'll just add that. Oh, it might be in the other one. Let's go here. Yeah, okay, here we go. So we got our flutes and oboes, strings, brass, Glock. There we go. Okay, so we're going to choose Glock. So now that Glock DX7 preset is our oscillator type. So already, listen to that. Very different than just the simple triangle oscillator we had there, right? So now, you've got this lovely starting point of a different timbre. So you can use a DX7, but I'm mixing it in with a sine wave to give us a bit of a different timbre than just a straight DX7 patch too. But that's just a good starting point. If you're kind of lost and you don't know where to start from, just throw a DX7 preset on your oscillator 1, mix it in with a different oscillator type on oscillator 2, and just have fun. Okay, and very quickly, because I'm having fun modulating everything, this preset actually has some delay on it. So let's use one of the LFOs. LFO 1 can modulate the delay time, which is super cool. So right now it's set around the middle, but we can have LFO 1 either subtly if we want, or we can crank it so you can really hear. So if you set it a little more subtly and then adjust your LFO time to taste, that LFO is now subtly shifting the delay time depending on how overtly we want that to sound. So right here, it's going to sound seasick. but it can work really well depending on how your LFO is set. Like we've got it set to random walk right now too, which is kind of fun. So that means it's kind of just drunkenly shifting itself as it goes up by 1 or 2, up or down by 1, depending on where it left off, and kind of sounds a bit drunk, which is perfect for modulating the delay time in this case. That's kind of a happy accident. I forgot I did that. But in any case, modulate your delay time by an LFO1, and then you can get some cool kind of textures and little warbles happening that give it a bit of the organic kind of sense of movement. Okay, I've really got to get going. I'm rambling as usual, but there was one more thing I wanted to show you that could be very helpful in the context of preset creation. So let's say you've got a preset on the Deluge that you like and you don't know how they did it, or you made something and you forgot how you did it. I do that all the time. There's a way now to kind of figure out what's been patched where pretty easily. So I've got this kind of moving kind of pad sound here that I like. That starts with like a high LFO, and then slows down. And then when you let go, it really slows down and keeps going and slows itself to a stop. So it's great for ambience and kind of building atmosphere. But I don't remember how I set that up. So with the community firmware, I can click the select encoder, get into the song menu here, the preset menu, and then I can scroll through until I see modulation matrix. That's what that says. This is 7-segment display, so that's modulation matrix, trust me. But now when I click there, I can scroll through and see all the patch cables that have been set up, all the modulation relationships that have been set up in this patch. So some of them will be pre-existing. The moment you create a new patch on the Deluge, it will set up your aftertouch or velocity or some of your MPE kind of routing, just so you don't have to do that. But in this case, a lot of this is stuff I did that I've forgotten about. So here I have frequency is being modulated by envelope 1. Now here's MPE, I didn't do that. Then envelope 2 is modulating. There you go, that's what's doing it. So the LFO2 speed is being modulated by envelope 2. So that's where we're getting this ramping up or slowing down LFO speed. So there you go. You can use that modulation matrix menu in the synth menu to scroll through all the patch cables that have been set up and understand and dissect how did that preset do that thing, or how did I do that thing and I forgot. In any case, hopefully that's useful to you. That's all I really have time for now. Hopefully you got something out of some of this. Some of these things that I've been working on may end up as my partial submissions at the end of the month. I certainly am going to submit something, so keep your eye out. And hopefully you submit something too. Or if you don't, you got something out of this, or get something out of the preset competition in general, because really it's all about getting more people interested in the community firmware and growing the community in general, because it's very strong. It's probably my favorite part about the Deluge, really, or one of them, is the community. And I really enjoy being a part of it. So hopefully you get something out of that as well. And the preset competition should be fun. So give it a whirl. Okay, that's it for me. I really got to run. This is taking way too long. I got to stop talking.